Chairman, we're now live.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to those attending and also to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Resident Services Select Committee, and my name is Councillor Bridges, and I'm Chairman of this meeting. Key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and to hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and also accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. For those present in the room and intending to speak, please note that you'll be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. A reminder to councillors, officers and those speaking today that you should turn your microphone button on when speaking. This will ensure you can be heard in the room and by those watching online. Some quick housekeeping rules before we go on to our main agenda. We're not expecting a fire alarm this evening. However, if one sounds, please follow the officers to the fire exits out of the building to the designated meeting point, which is the Civic Centre forecourt. Mobile devices to be placed on silent or switched off, and residents are welcome to give feedback using the feedback forms available. With that said, we go on to our first item. Apologies for absence, please.
Yes, apologies have been received from Councillor Colleen Sullivan with Councillor Darren Davis substituting, and also Councillor Punja has advised that she'll be a little late arriving this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Warm welcome to Councillor Davis, and hello to Councillor Sullivan, who I understand is watching us online as we speak. Item 2, declarations of interest in matters that come in before this meeting. Are there any? No, thank you. Item 3, to receive the minutes of the previous meeting, pages 1 to 8. Thank you very much. I can confirm that all business this evening will be discussed in Part 1. There will be no Part 2 items this evening, which brings us on to Item 5, the Safer Hillingdon Partnership and Metropolitan Police Service Report, pages 9 to 30. We'll start with Richard Webb. Good evening. Whenever you're ready, please.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Just to introduce the item, I won't go through all the detail in the report, but to explain a bit of the background and the position in relation to the Safe Hillingdon Partnership at the moment. I joined the council in May. One of the things I was asked to do is have a look at the Safe Hillingdon Partnership priorities and strategy on the basis that the last strategy that says in the report had concluded earlier this year. I've included in the report some data against the priorities that the Safe Hillingdon Partnership had up until at the end of the period of validity of the strategy. Those priorities were set a number of years previously, so it was right that we undertook a full review, and we're in the process of doing that now. So the intention is the partnership has recently, in fact only just over a week ago, met to review the latest strategic assessment and to reconsider its priorities for the year ahead. We've also held some discussions about the way that partnership will operate in future, with the intention of putting in place a new strategy early part of next year, and some clear plans underneath it for how collectively partners through the partnership will work together at driving improvements against those priorities. It is a recognition, of course, that the partnership has also some new duties. Effectively, the duties fall on individual organisations, but under the serious violence duties that a number of the partners have across London, all community safety partnerships are focused on how collectively we meet those duties. And that includes undertaking a needs assessment to understand the nature of serious violence in the local area, the causes and drivers of that violence, and then develop a strategy which will need to be ready and published by the end of January next year, reflecting how together we're focused on reducing serious violence in the borough. So that works nicely in terms of timing against the broader community safety partnership strategy that we hope to finalise in the early part of next year. So some of the data from the needs assessment has been included in the report, as I say, against the previous priorities of the partnership, and just to highlight some of the general trends to provide a bit of a context for any questions or discussions you want to raise. The partnership's priorities I've included in the report as well. These have yet to be ratified, but from the discussions we had at the last partnership meeting and the process we went through to confirm the different views and weightings we would give different priority issues, it appears that the most likely priorities will be violence against women and girls, including domestic abuse, combating drugs, I'll explain that in a moment, antisocial behaviour and other violent crime, including serious violence and knife crime. The priority relating to combating drugs primarily reflects the fact that there is a new combating drugs and alcohol partnership for Hillingdon that's been formed under the Harm to Hope strategy, and to have oversight of the spending of significant sums of money that's available from central government to drive alcohol and drug-related harm. And strands of that strategy do include disrupting the supply of drugs and the criminal elements and activities relating to drugs. So the partnership's recognising having a new combating drugs and alcohol board reporting to it, that it needs to have a focus on supporting that partnership activity relating to reducing drugs, which is a significant driver of a wide range of crime. And violent crime, of course, reflects the new duties and the need for us to focus, understandably, on serious violence. So I will stop there, but if I may, I'd like to hand over to Anthony Bennett, who's obviously provided a much more detailed police report.
Yeah, thank you. Anthony Bennett. I'm the Neighbourhood Superintendent for Hillingdon, and well, I'll just quickly touch on some areas where, within the report, where we're facing some challenges, and cover some figures where we're doing well, and just cover some key activities really, and then I'll touch at the end on the sort of new Met for London work, which is how the Met is going to improve trust and confidence within Hillingdon and the wider London. So I suppose one thing that's changed since the last meeting is that I am now the dedicated superintendent for Hillingdon, having also covered Ealing and Hounslow up until April-May this year. So very much I'll be overseeing the ward teams that sit within Hillingdon, the schools teams that sit within Hillingdon, and some other partnership resources. What hasn't changed within that are the response teams, local investigations, public protection, and HQ responsibilities still sit centrally within the West Area Borough Command Unit across those three boroughs. Just to give some context really to my role and some developments at the SLT level within the police. So in terms of performance, looking across the year 2022 into 2023, we did see some increases in robbery, which went up 15%, and theft offences by 9%. And that mirrored London-wide increases, were actually higher at 21% to 22% respectively. So we think the drivers for that was around, it was the first full year where we didn't have, for the last few years, where we didn't have lockdowns going on across London, and hence we did notice last year that everywhere got a lot busier in terms of nighttime economy and also the retail sector as well. So that was driving, I'd say, London-wide increases, which we saw, albeit to a lesser extent, within Hillingdon. In terms of violent crime, which is one of the priorities within the police in West Area, very much a focus last year on male violence against women and girls, and we did see some good results from that. We didn't see any rises in violence against the person crime, and there was a 1% reduction in sexual offences, which had seen increase the previous year. So I'd say there's a lot of work going into that. There's also a 13% reduction in knife crime with injury, and a reduction of 28% in possession of weapons offences within the age group of 1 to 24 years. And the number of knife crime injury victims reduced by 6%. So very much, you know, we were doing a lot around violent crime last year, and it was good to see some of those results. One area where we are challenged on is sanction detections, which have been in steady decline, not just in Hillingdon, but across London and the country, actually, for a number of years. Across the 2022-2023 year, sanction detection rates in Hillingdon stood at 7% for all offences, against an MPS-wide figure of 7.3%, so we're just below the MPS average there. It did vary depending on the crime type, so in terms of possession of weapons and drug offence detections, possession of weapons detections, they stood at, possession of weapons offences, sanction detection rate was at 70%, and for drug offences at 43%. However, for robbery, sanction detection rates were 8%, and sexual offences at 7%, which again we're in line with wider MPS figures for the same crime types. But there is a lot of work will be going on around that to make improvements, and I'll touch on some of those in a bit. In terms of trust and confidence, again, another priority for West Area BCU last year going into this year. So very much the new Met for London plan, which I'll touch on the elements of that a bit later, is very much focused around how we improve that. But from a professional standards perspective, there's a lot of work going on to root out corrupt officers and staff. Also trying to speed up the misconduct process as well, which does take far too long for both victims and those suspected of offences. There's a lot of development going on around recruitment and training, and for example for our ward officers we are looking at a new training programme for them to professionalise them, and also looking at how we calibrate our values and standards and make sure those are driven through officers as well. And again, the new Met for London plan is very much focused around driving values and standards in officers. In terms of our response teams, we are looking at quite high demand really that has increased over the last year. So there's a 4.1% increase, sorry, 2.5% increase in calls in Hillingdon compared to the previous 12 months. And in terms of meeting our calls, so for I-grade calls, which are met within 15 minutes, we hit that figure at 71.7% of the time. And for S-grade calls, which we should be getting there within the hour, we're hitting that at 50.8% of the time, which again was in line with MPS figures. But we are working on trying to improve that. And there were some resourcing challenges last year on response teams, abstractions because of events going on in London, and also training to do with a new IT program called Connect, which really impacted on our resourcing within response teams last year. But we have filled a lot of those vacancies, and we are moving into better position this year. In terms of the neighbourhood partnership side of things, they are seen as the key driver in neighbourhood teams to increase in trust and confidence, and very much the new Met for London plan has been focused on how do we improve frontline policing and neighbourhood policing. One of the ways we'll do this is by increasing police officer diversity. So through last year we had an outreach programme across London which we were driving locally, and I'm glad to say that in West Area we did have the second best results for recruiting people from diverse backgrounds into the Metropolitan Police, and that is an ongoing programme of work, because the more we can get the communities of Hillingdon looking and feeling like the communities they serve, that's one of the best drivers around trust and confidence. Neighbourhood teams are very much involved as well with that tackling male violence against women and girls issue. So we did lots of awareness around Street Safe, which is where people can report areas where they feel unsafe, and then we can work with our own police teams and also the local authority in addressing those issues. We've worked with the CCTV operators within the local authority to make sure they're better briefed and trained to identify predatory behaviour and potential victims. We've done women's self-defence classes, and also we've run something called Op Vigilance, which is officers going out in plain clothes, supported by uniform officers, in key hotspot locations for where violence against women and girls takes place, to identify predatory offenders that would be in those locations. Again, around trust and confidence, stop and search, we've been trying to improve that in terms of how we work with community to monitor stop and search. So we've improved our community monitoring group, and we introduced a new process around Section 60s, which is where we can stop and search someone without specific grounds if we think there's going to be violence in that location. And what we're doing when we do implement that is doing a review with partners and the public around that to try and give an explanation as to why it was implemented, and to identify any community issues that may have resulted. And we're also involving more young people in police officer training, so they can give an experience of what it's like to be stopped and searched, just to try and improve how officers treat individuals when they're doing that. In terms of stop and search, we're still seeing some disproportionality in terms of the people that are defined as being from black ethnic groups, but that has come down from where we were at the start of that 12-month period, so it is an improving picture around that. In terms of the group that gets stopped the most within Hillingdon, it is those people that are defined as coming from white backgrounds, but as a percentage of the as a proportion of the 1,000 of the population, more people from black communities get stopped. And again, that is part of the new Met for London plan. We've just come out of a meeting where we're discussing a stop and search charter, and that is very much looking at how we recalibrate stop and search across London. And again, it's all about how do we reduce that disproportionality and how do we treat better during those interactions. Some activity highlights. Op Nightingale has been in operation in Uxbridge over the last 12 months, which is where we fund overtime and also look at problem-solving activity within a specific location. This year we've had Hayes Town added to that. It's a Home Office programme. So again, we're having more resources brought into Hayes Town on overtime, and again, we're looking at problem-solving activity in that location. So that's really good development for us from a local perspective. And then Ask Angela, we've been building on that, so that's where people can go if they need to report something but feel they can't do it in an open way. They can go to a licensee or someone that works in a coffee shop and ask for Angela, and that person in the shop should know what to do in terms of offering support to that person. So that is an ongoing piece of work which we've developed over the last 12 months and going into this year as well. In terms of perpetrators, so recognising that against violence against women and girls, most suspects are male. We have been giving input to male students about the law around harassment and what is and isn't acceptable behaviour. So those sessions have been taking place in some specific colleges to roll that out. So we have been addressing that issue within the borough. In terms of our local investigations, so just moving out the neighbourhoods piece, they very much, their focus again has been around violence, and there's been a weekly violence meeting which we drive forward, where we do look at a range of figures and areas and look at the best way to do that in conjunction with partners, and we're looking at how we've improved our offender management processes as well within the local investigations, and made some changes there to really try and improve on how we look at those individuals. There's also been a specific violence against women and girls strategy, which our Detective Superintendent Figo Forazan drives forward, and again, partners are very much involved with how we do that and the activities which take place under that banner. Some of the challenges from the local investigations perspective are around burglary, again, sanction detection rates, trying to get those increased. So one change which has been made is the implementation of a forensic conversion team who focus on dealing with forensic lifts from burglary scenes and focus on prolific burglary nominals. So that's, again, just one way of trying to increase the chances of finding out who's actually committed those offences. And again, one problem we have had is the experience of detectives and also vacancies in supervisors within detective posts. But we have, in recent months, had an increase in sergeant posts within the detective strand, and that is building on the experience. So that is actually an improving picture as we go into 2023. Public protection have had the same issues around detective experience, but again, there have been some uplifts within the public protection strand within the West area over the last 6 months or so, and we are getting to a point now where vacancies are very low within the public protection strand, recognising the importance on the crime types which they cover, which are domestic abuse, child abuse, stalking, harassment, and sexual offences. So West Areas has continued to see the highest volume of both domestic abuse incidents and domestic abuse offences across the Met. And so in terms of the what proportion that sits in terms of the rest of the Met, it equates to for domestic abuse incidents, it's I think about 11.6% of the Met is Met's figures driven by West Area, which is very high. But we are working through that, and as I say, that's why we've invested people within that strand. But in terms of we had seen sort of yearly increases, but there was a reduction of 4% of domestic abuse offences in the year 2022-2023. So again, that was an improving picture, but we need to drive that down further. We saw the introduction of, again, beyond detective constables, detective sergeants, we've had an increase of inspector within the public protection strand as well, which has enabled one detective inspector to sit across each local authority area, and have also helped give more focus to our sexual offences team as well. And again, we are there are various reviews going on around public protection, which could see increase in resources moving forward. And there is an uplift programme, which will see a number of detective constables increase in those strands in the incoming months. I won't go through everything on here, but in terms of rape and serious sexual offences, we have the fourth highest volume of all sexual offences, with rape offences accounting for about 37% of the Met total. But we have seen within Hillingdon a 2% reduction in the last 12 months of rape offences specifically. But we do need to put more attention within that area. And we also had the predatory offender units launched in 2022, and they did some really good work across 2022 and arrested almost 300 suspects. So that's a really good news story. They will be moving into a wider proactive team within the West Area BCU moving forward, which will look at sexual offenders but other crime types as well, together with some of the proactive team that would previously have looked over the gang side of things. So the details of that have just been worked out, so that will change, but it shouldn't impact on the performance around predatory offenders. I'll just quickly move on to, in terms of the HQ strand who deal with professional standards, they are seeing some changes over the last 12 months as the Commissioner looks to address the trust and confidence issues and making sure that we're dealing with officers effectively that have come to our attention for alleged behaviour which is obviously below the standards we expect. So there is a complaints resolution unit which has been created which will look to address issues before they necessarily go into the professional standards unit within the BCU to see if those can be resolved prior to any misconduct processes being enacted. And that has had some benefits locally in terms of reducing the number of investigations the local BCU have had to undertake. There is work now ongoing, and it should happen in the next few months, where the local professional standards unit will be centralised, and that is to give consistency of approach and making sure some of those changes which are being driven forward get enacted consistently across all BCUs, but they will still sit locally, but they will be centrally managed to all intents and purposes. And another thing within the HQ strand was the implementation of Connect, which was a challenge. It's very much changed the way officers work, but longer term it is seen to offer some benefits in terms of reducing duplication and making sure the standard of case files improves over a period of time. So that gives an idea about across all the different strands, things that are going on. In terms of the new Met for London plan, which wasn't in existence this time last year, some of the key areas which are being driven forward at the moment are around the PCSO numbers. So we will be seeing an increase in PCSOs in Hillingdon over the next year and then 2 years. Inspectors, we should be seeing an increase in the number of neighbourhood inspectors within Safe Neighbours Policing, within the neighbourhood policing teams. We're also looking at the accommodation piece, so there's actually active work going on to see how we can achieve this target which the Commissioner has of being within 20 minutes walk of the areas which they patrol for the neighbourhood policing teams. So we are looking at accommodation options at this moment in time. We're also doing work around engagement. Some of that will involve how we include wall panels more and how we engage and work with wall panels, and how we can look at the tasking processes that emanate from discussions that go on within those panels, that go on within partnership meetings generally, and how they can inform our tasking and ability to obtain additional assets for the people of Hillingdon. And also comms we're looking to improve as part of that work as well. There's lots of other work streams within the new Met for London, but that gives you sort of an idea about some things which are progressing at this moment in time. And very much that is going to be the focus over the next year, is how we meet those commitments, and we'll be looking to brief those into various meetings that we attend over the next 12 months. And that was a very quick run through really of the report, and like Richard said, I'm happy to answer any questions around that.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Bennett. I would invite members for questions. We'll start with Councillor Gohill, and do so. I'll just refer members to pages 15 if they require any assistance for lines of inquiries, but I'm sure you have plenty of your own. Councillor Gohill.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your report and for your earlier presentation as well. My first question is actually about the last thing you said, which was about boots on the ground, how many officers are being recruited. I appreciate you said there's more, and I also appreciate it might be early days to have a proper answer, but do you know how many more we're looking at? Is it 1? Is it 100? Is it how many more officers? Maybe it doesn't have to be numbers of officers. Maybe as a percentage, are you looking to increase within Hillingdon?
Yeah, so for PCSOs, I think the first year we're looking at 14 PCSOs additionally, then it goes up to 36 after 2 years. PC numbers aren't really increasing, but what we are doing is committing to making sure we've got 2 police officers per ward. So we've just gone through an exercise in the last few weeks, recognising we've got vacancies, of making sure all vacancies on ward teams are filled. And that should be the case now, that we don't have any vacancies on the ward teams. What work's been going on to make sure that those filled vacancies are felt, significantly by the community, is there's been a lot of work going on about reducing abstractions as well within the police officer numbers. I think there's over the last year and a half, the amount of abstractions has been quite significant for ward-based officers, because for some of those reasons I mentioned earlier, they've had to backfill on response teams, but also gone into London to do various events, etc. So what the Commissioner is doing is looking to make sure that some of the gaps on response teams are filled by officers from specialist commands, so moving officers from specialist commands into frontline policing. There's training for the Met command and control teams, and also quite significant uplift in numbers there, so calls can be managed better, so only the right calls come through to officers within the borough as well. And then the right care, right person, which I think everyone would have heard of, that will be coming in the 1st of November, and there's a significant reduction in demand is expected from that programme of work, which will again mean that neighbourhood officers will be more able to engage with the public on their wards and actually be out on the streets. So that's sort of where we are really. Then in terms of the inspector uplift, I think we're getting about 3 for neighbourhoods, should be the plan. So yeah.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor?
Yes, thank you. And my second question is just how residents or concerned people in areas are able to get through to their Safe Neighbourhoods team. We've had several instances within my ward, and I know colleagues have had theirs in their wards as well, where there's something specific that happens, say in a small area, for example, they see drug dealing going on, and they know these people come back consecutively because it's a hot spot, so to say. But when asked what to do to get through to the neighbourhood policing team, they're told call 999, and it will then go through to the Saferhood neighbour team. Is that being revisited in any way? I don't think it's the best use of time for 999 operators to be. Unless
there's a danger to the person.
Unless there's an immediate danger.
Yeah, they should be called 999. You're right. It's not
they're told if they spot them. They're in their own homes. They're not actually disturbing them, but if they spot them, to call 999, and then that's how they get someone out immediately. Is there no better way? Because this is what we're being told by our ward panel teams. Can that be revisited at all?
Yeah. So what's happening as part of the Met command and control is they're going to be advertising when people should dial 999, when people should dial 101, and also that should be some stuff in there around the ward teams as well. So I think in terms of the ward teams, we've published we've just gone through a programme of making sure all the numbers are correct, all the emails addresses are correct, and we've pushed those out so far at the moment on some publications, and it will feature in some of our newsletters. And I think very much, if someone's got a local issue like that, it should be that number which people call. So that's the message we're trying to get out at the moment, really. If it's a persistent community issue, where there's no immediate need for officers to come out, but needs sort of addressing, then the ward panel would be the best place to go from a local perspective. So we just need to be better at advertising that locally ourselves, and we have started that. But also with that tied in with the messaging which the Met's HQ Media and Comms team will be putting out generally around when to call what numbers, should hopefully start clarifying things a bit better.
Councillor Gardner.
Hi, I'm quite pleased in a way, and don't get me wrong, that the increases DV convictions are going up in terms of how you manage to stop, because it means that finally people are realising that they can admit what's going on. But I'm also concerned that within that domestic abuse, there's also rape, which happens within domestic abuse situations, and the fact that a lot of people that I speak to are told by whoever that rape or having that sort of sex within marriage is perfectly acceptable, and I've said no, it's actually a crime. When you arrest somebody for DV and you're speaking to the victim, do you ask if they're also a victim of rape? That's my first question.
I don't think because I suppose you obviously got to be careful they don't ask sort of leading questions, I suppose, in that respect. So it's not a standard question I think officers would ask. I think if the offence has happened, and then there's need to obviously arrest the suspect at that point, whether rape's been alleged or not, then we've got specially trained officers that would work with the victim really, and you'd hope at that point that person would then open up and say, well actually I reported this, but I've also been raped within the partnership or marriage. So those officers are trained to have those conversations with the victims, and it's those matters which they are trained to pick up. An officer from response team at the scene of the crime wouldn't get into that type of conversation, I suggest, and they're not trained to do that, because it's quite a sensitive conversation. So unless it's alleged, I'd expect it should come up when the specialist officers then have those conversations with the victim.
Councillor Gardner.
It's worth bearing in mind as well, Councillor Gardner.
I'm very sorry, if you're going to speak, can you use a microphone, please?
So officers, when they attend those calls, they have to complete sort of a booklet, essentially a documentation, which has a sort of a defined risk assessment, which is based on evidence-based best practice. So whilst it doesn't directly ask that question, it does start to get the conversation flowing for domestic violence victims in terms of the circumstances that they're going through. So it does start to solicit information, if that makes sense. It's not leading, but it would seek to draw out further circumstances through a series of other questions. So the conversation, we obviously seek to explore other issues, is the point that I'm making, as a standard process, and everybody who goes to those calls would do that.
Councillor Gardner, your supplementary?
Yes. Well, is there any chance that councillors can start attending gold groups again? Because instances happen in our wards, and what happens is we find out about them, but we don't find out about them from the police. But we hear so-and-so said this, so-and-so said that. I mean, it's incredibly difficult. I've already spoken to you about this before, but it's very, very difficult if we don't know exactly what's happened. We don't need to know the ins and outs, but just so that we can say to the residents, so actually what you've been told is a load of rubbish. This is actually what happened. So is there any way that we can start including the ward councillors, please?
We'll look into it. I mean, in terms of informing you, what we've been making sure of locally is that the sergeants or inspector would make contact with ward councillors. So say we have a murder or another incident, then and there's a gold group running, then we've been asking to brief accordingly in that way. So I contact the MPs, IAG chairs, etc., and then we do ask for the ward councillors now to be contacted. I apologise if that's not always the case. I think in terms of gold groups, it usually obviously is the more serious things like murders that we would hold a gold group for, rather than just general violent incidents. So we don't necessarily have as many as it wouldn't cover every incident you'd be interested in, I suppose. So we have to have another process outside the gold group for updating ward councillors. But I think we can take it back for consideration around inviting councillors on a more regular basis to gold groups. I don't think there's necessarily an issue with that. It's just never, since I've been at West area, it's not something, not just across Hillingdon, but the other Ealing and Hounslow that we traditionally do, but we can take it back as a consideration moving forward. But you should still know what's gone on, because the ward teams and the inspector should be really briefing you in with as much information as you need. And if that's not the case, we can take that back and have a look at that if it's not working.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a few questions, if I may.
I will just explain the protocol on this committee, Councillor Davis. So we allow members to ask a question, followed by a supplementary. We go around the table. Once everyone's had a fair share on the contribution, we'll then go back to you for the remaining questions, okay?
Perfect. I'll try and merge them all together then. So the questions was the backfill of the SNT, so fill in the gaps. Are we still using new officers for that? So new officers onto the service or from training?
So back in around Christmas time, we did move all the probation officers that we had into response because of the criticality around response teams. One of the benefits, whilst it created a bit of short-term gaps for us on neighbourhoods, one of the benefits is that we could then fill them with more experienced officers, which has been happening. So in terms of the flow of that has reduced quite significantly.
Okay.
Any supplementary, Councillor Davis?
Yeah. So also, I'm just trying to pick my best question now. So my ward panel within my ward operates excellent. I've got a brilliant SNT officer, PC Young, is excellent. But I was told yesterday that the ward SNT teams are not allowed to use certain social media platforms. They're only allowed to use Twitter. Well, within our wards and within Hillingdon, a higher number of our residents use the likes of Facebook, Instagram, and I'm finding from what I'm hearing from my residents is they're not getting the information about ward panels, about police, what's happening with the police, because they're not using the right platforms. Is that something that you'll be looking at to change, allowing access to these platforms?
We're always looking to develop. So Twitter's been something we have used a lot. In terms of other channels, we are looking at other things like, we use OWL, which I know not everybody signed up to, but that is definitely a growing area in terms of people signing up to that, and we are increasing our usage of that quite significantly over recent months, as we have with Twitter. And we're also moving to using Nextdoor as well, which I know everyone has their own views on that. But, so we are broadening it out. I think there's these aren't local issues, these are corporate issues around Facebook and Instagram, which we can't use locally, because I can't use them myself as a senior officer because of those issues. So at the moment, no, there's no plans around that. They are kept under review by the Central Media and Comms team, but we are trying to expand into other social media mechanisms which just help us a little bit more.
Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually going to lean in on that bit first. I was going to do it another way around, but I'm not really understanding why we can't use Facebook. That is where everybody is. I mean, Twitter is an echo chamber, right? I mean, great that we're putting it there, but no one's really listening. And the people who are on Twitter, just a bit of a sweeping statement, probably aren't going out and committing crimes, right? Just as a guess, it's kind of like boring politicians like us, like talking to each other. So I guess that worries me. Can we not be using community Facebook groups? Can we not be putting messages in there when there is a positive thing for the police to say, when they have, got a drug gang, or they've, hammered down some got rid of some child exploitation? Can it not be promoted in those groups using, the likes of us or other means? It doesn't necessarily have to come from the police officers.
Ben, Ben runs our media and comms group, so
yes,
it's a specialism.
There's a lot of work going in this space, and I think, as Anthony says, that it's trying to exploit the right opportunities. There are lots of them. Now, we do have locally borough-based accounts which we can post into, and actually, at the moment, the sort of fastest route to the ground is to start using those as much as we can. So we're increasing the link-in with our ward officers to the holders of those borough-based accounts, and actually we do promote news. So what we would often do is where we say releasing a tweet or something locally, we push that into the Facebook group that is for the borough as a whole, and that can then sort of link in all the various hashtags or whatever else to other groups that you're mentioning. So that is something we're doing, it's something we're building on. So we've put in place a bit of performance framework around it. It's something that's quite a big behavioural change that we're sort of having to drive. We've seen really significant uplifts in terms of the number of tweets locally, the amount of our messaging that's going out, newsletters as well, and referrals to that central team. It's something we're still trying to drive in terms of the behaviour to start using Twitter more. Instagram, there is a centrally held MPS account, and that's quite closely controlled, and there are reasons for that, which I'd have to go back and kind of clarify exactly what they are. TikTok, obviously, given current security concerns, is a complete no-go for us. And I know that the central media team is looking at other mediums as well, because certainly younger age groups use different tooling. One of the things we have to be mindful of in terms of the rollout of different platforms as well is, of course, if you have ward-based accounts for absolutely everything, you create an absolute bureaucratic nightmare in terms of trying to maintain their currency and that they are live and that they're well maintained and administrated. So there's a kind of we have to balance effort versus reward, if that makes sense. So that this is some of the considerations of the media and comms team in terms of how much tooling they roll out there. But ultimately, we're trying to boost it as much as we can, absolutely, and open to ideas always.
Councillor Small, just supplementary.
Chair, I don't know whether that's something that we could potentially have as a review topic for this committee. Actually, have a look at maybe the police could come in, not putting them all on the spot right now, come and actually do that, and how we can link that in with the council comms as well as a potential. Or maybe that's for the forward plan later.
We can certainly look into it outside if it falls within the committee.
My question is around ASB, and I think one of the challenges we'll all get as residents is the police aren't dealing with ASB. You know, someone is stealing steaks from Sainsbury's, or they're playing loud music at Ruislip Lido, or they're just being a general nuisance and committing like what would maybe be seen as petty crime. How in the turnaround plan is that going to be addressed, and what are we doing specifically in Hillingdon to try and reassure residents that when they are the victims of what might be lesser crimes that aren't like, you know, rape or domestic violence, or that they are also being taken seriously?
Yeah, so in terms of ASB, we saw a double-digit decrease last year, and we're currently sitting at around about 14% decrease in ASB this year in terms of reports. But I know a lot of that goes unreported. But in terms of where it sits within the New Met for London plan, there is commitment there to deal with those sort of issues, as well with other sorts of low-level sort of crime as well. And I think from our perspective, it is about getting the officers, making sure they're consistently on their wards, addressing those issues. You know, the more we keep them on the wards, the more possibility they've got to engage with the residents, understand what the issues are, work with the residents and the local authority in addressing those problems, and very much sort of seeing where we are. So in terms of, we'd expect that to come via the ward panels as well. And what we're trying to do is increase the mechanism from members of the public going to the ward panel where they'll be reporting on ASB and things like that. That will feed into us at the SLT level within Hillingdon, where we can then have a discussion with the partners around where that sits within the tasking process. So very much joining in with the local authority around that. If it's at such a level we think we need additional support, we will then decide to go to the West Area BCU tasking meeting, where we can then see if that meets the criteria for additional resources as well. So very much it starts with the engagement bit, getting the comms right, understanding the issues, getting the officers, make sure the officers are on the ground as much as possible, and then feeding it into the decision-making process.
Richard.
Thank you. And obviously, just to add that ASB is, of course, a shared responsibility, and just from a council perspective, as you mentioned, for example, noise at something like the Lido, we've recently restructured our antisocial behaviour teams. We now have a localities antisocial behaviour team, which we haven't fully launched yet. Later the next month, we'll be providing more information about that team's remit and how that team will work on more persistent and long-term problems related to antisocial behaviour. It's been a gap before. So we still have a street scene enforcement team, an environmental protection team, and an out-of-hours noise team that anyone can report issues of sort of noise and parties, loud music at the Lido, and that provides a nighttime response as well to try and immediately deal with the problems. That will feed into casework, and if the casework is problematic and we're finding it difficult to find a solution, it can go to the localities team. And one of our commitments is to have localities team members attend the wall panels So there's a council representative there that is able to hear firsthand those issues that haven't yet been resolved, and to bring those back to do more work across council teams to try and find a solution.
Councillor Punja.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for my lateness today, and I'm sorry that I missed your presentation as well, but I did read the report. I just want to follow up on what Councillor Smallwood said on that ASB and this whole idea of trust for the Met, because I'm sure that most of us councillors around this room have similar kind of resistance with residents who don't want to call, and when you say that things aren't reported as much and there's been a decrease, people don't want to make phone calls, they don't want to do that, they don't know where to go and how. And so that trust, and yes, I agree that having more ward presence with officers is going to be helpful and useful, but how that, I think there's a, that apathy that people are feeling within the police has got to be addressed, and I kind of wanted to know how specifically that will be addressed to help people report the petty crimes that we've been talking about, as well as the serious crimes, but also feeling that they have got a place to go to, and that it is not going to be ignored. And even if people aren't going to come, because one of the things that we say as councillors from our S&T meetings is that if you don't report them, the police won't know that these are hotspots, so they will ignore them as they won't know. So there needs to be more of that community cohesion going on between the police and the community.
Yeah, no, I accept that, and the new Met for London plan is all about building trust and confidence, so people report things to us more. And the reason they don't is because they don't think it's going to make any difference. And that's not just things like ASB, that's things like rape, sexual offences as well. The more serious crimes. And so it's not just one thing that can work. So when we talk about the comms and making sure people understand what we're doing, so it's about visibility, it's about getting officers out on the wards, making sure they stay on the wards, so they can have those regular engagements with the community and build up relationships. That will build upon trust and confidence. And when they're not there, it's trying to make the community understand what they are doing. So even though you may not see them out on the street, they may be doing warrant inquiries or other things which are actually still contributing to reducing crime and ASB on that ward. And so we've got to be better at communicating what the officers do, the day in the life of a neighbourhood officer, so people understand that. We've got to be better at informing people around when they should call police, and if they do call us, that will get answered and given answers on. So some of that is messaging around that. And then I think from our perspective, it's also trying to just engage better. So building up our wall panels so they're a bit more representative and more people on them. And then also communicating from those wall panels what difference those have had, because that will then generate more people to attend them. So there's a lot there, I think, around how we make officers more visible, but also make sure that that where things are getting raised just by the community, that we feed back the results to the community, because that will then start to build up confidence to say, well, actually, yeah, if I do report it, something will get done. So there's a number of little things. And it's all intertwined really with the increase in our detectives numbers, the making sure our response officers are those teams are fully staffed and equipped effectively, and also making sure our officers are valued as well. So because that then drive their motivation to do a good job, and that's part of the fixing foundations bit of the new Met for London is very much around making sure officers got the right IT training. And welfare support as well. So that's what ultimately what you're saying is that's what New Met for London is there to do, is to make sure people feel that they can report stuff to us and things will get done. And that's from ASB all the way up to the more serious crimes.
Councillor Punja, would you like to follow up? No. Okay. Councillor Farley.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you. I'm echoing some of the commentary that's been made. I mean, the panel's great. We'll see a lot of them there working and they're operational, which in some cases they need to be reinstated. They do work. In West Drayton, I've been going on a monthly basis with the local teams, which is well received by residents, and it's appreciated. We had some comments. We were talking about areas of the ward, and it's been really good. And this may not be necessarily for the public arena, but with regards to some of the statistics, I was wondering whether it would be possible if the committee could receive something like a heat map of some sort that shows where certain activity or certain crimes are more prevalent in areas of the borough, because it may help in understanding what is going on and what the sort of key demographics or key elements that are occurring in certain places. And wondering if that's at all possible to share. So it may not be suitable for the public arena or public viewing, but if that is at all possible. I have a question. I don't know in terms of pages are helpful, but on page 22 of the report we've been given, could you clarify what a police supervisor dip sample is?
That's where they'll take. Is that reference to stop and searches? Yeah.
This report will actually quality assurance.
It's basically where. So what we'll do. Stop and searches get supervised anyway, but what should be happening is the inspector or another sergeant will just go into select at random a stop and search record and then check to see what quality and standard it is. So it's basically a QA process to understand, are stop and searches on that team being done properly, and we also do that within the community monitoring groups as well. So we'll dip sample some stop and search records and just review those in terms of, are we happy that that person was stopped for the right reason? Has it been written up correctly? Was all the information provided? So it's basically just going into, just randomly dip sampling a piece of work to see if it's been done correctly, and then obviously offering feedback if it needs be.
Councillor Barlow?
Just did that involve pulling body-worn camera footage or anything like that sort of thing?
Yes,
it does.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. That means all the members have now asked a question. So I know Councillor Gardner and Councillor Davis said earlier that they perhaps have some more. Would they like to ask any before we bring this item to a close? Councillor Davis?
If I may, your reaction time for SNT and anything that's reported within the ward teams, is there a set time limit on that? Because I know from personal experience that there was a cannabis farm reported, and it took 7 days for the farm to actually be inspected. It was proven because there was a glow, shall we say, from every window in the house, front and back, and the place wasn't dealt with for 7 days. By then, the house had been cleared. So I'm just wondering what sort of reaction times we're having.
For neighbourhood teams, there's no set reaction time as such, unless they've been given an S-grade call, which sometimes does happen, and that's got to be within the hour, but they're not really there to answer that type of call. So on something like a cannabis factory, and when I was a sergeant in PCR, I used to deal with those as well. There's a lot more planning that might have to go into it before we actually do it. There's a health and safety issue for a start, which really needs looking at. So, we'd struggle to do that within a really fast time, i.e. getting the information one day and going there the next, because we need to do proper intelligence checks on it and make sure there's no safety risks, who's going in and out of that, try and work that out. Are there any risks associated with any persons there or the property itself? And then you've got to get the resources to go in there and do it effectively. Because if you go in there and and you don't get injured because there's a risk you're not assessed, then you could face a lot of plants, which then you've got to get property services, and you could have officers then stuck on that building for 2 days, and that's not a good use of officers. So there's a bit more planning goes into it, which means we can't just do it the next day. We have to really give it a bit of consideration and make sure that the resourcing of it isn't going to impact other areas of policing and that it's dealing with any risks. There's no, but the expectation will be they deal with it as soon as possible, given all the other demands on them ultimately.
Anything further, Councillor Davis?
Yeah, my concern would be with that is if the Met is not picking up the low-hanging fruit, and it was proven, evidence was given with that exact case. If the low-hanging fruit is not being picked up, and, for example, you don't have the resources. Is that not setting a bad precedent for our residents? Oh, it will get dealt with in 7 days or 5 days or 4 days when it was physically there. I understand there is planning to do, but 2 officers could have secured the property. They could have had high visible policing outside. They didn't actually have to go in to resolve that. And I'm more than happy to share with you the photos after, so you can have a look at them if you'd like. But it was quite worrying.
If it turns on the property, but I think, you know, one they did deal with it, albeit 7 days later, so it's not been ignored. You know, generally we find that canvas factories, once they're set up, they don't disappear that quickly, so there is a bit of time for us to make sure we're doing it in the right way. So, you know, I don't want to second guess the officers and you know, how they looked at that, but I think it's reasonable that it took a bit of time for them to plan that out. And remember, they've got other demands, so, you know, whilst canvas factories are important that we do deal with them, there's other things going on as well which officers will be having to deal with, which may limit their ability to do it. And you factor in rest days and things like that as well. You know, not everything can get dealt with like the next day or the day after. Sometimes they just do take a bit longer when it's a neighbour team dealing with them.
Thank you. Any other questions from members before I close? Councillor Smallwood?
Just a quick one about how we, when you are engaging with the public, that we make sure it's the public rather than possibly the demographic of most of our ward panels, which is over 50, predominantly white, living in the north of the borough, right? That's great, and those people are as important as everybody else, but that's not the whole of Hillingdon. How, especially younger people, especially maybe women from ethnic minority groups, you know, people that are hard to reach, how are we going out and engaging with them, or what plans have we got to do that through means that they might want to do, right? A young person who's 19 is probably not want to go and sit in a room with a bunch of police officers and talk about crime, but they may fill in a survey, they may engage in another way at another event. What sort of stuff are we doing to think outside the box around that?
It's difficult. I mean, it's not just police, it's the local authority, I think, have difficulty in this space as well. It's a constant challenge because young people particularly have busy lives. So we are trying to build more in with the colleges. So, you know, in terms of some of the inputs, we're trying to get in there a bit more and actually, you know, where the students are within those locations. So, for example, the stop and search consultation we're doing at the moment, we're trying to go in via the schools and colleges to make sure we are interacting with the young people in those locations. In terms of ethnic diverse members of the community, then I think we do have some programs of work going on to address that. So we've done some work over the last year or so with the Sahara Sisterhood, and we've been going in there giving inputs around expectations around domestic violence and you know, other how to report things to police, for example. And we've also got a good link in with all the faith leads across Hillingdon as well. So we have regular meetings with the faith leads just to have an understanding of representing their community. I think one thing that Matt does miss a little bit sometimes is they tend to be the elder members of those faith communities. So trying to speak to the younger people is the next step, I think, within those areas. So we're working on it. It's not perfect by any stretch, but those are sort of mechanisms we're starting to build up. And again, within the Met for London plan, there is a race action plan in there. Some of that will be about how. So I've got a meeting tomorrow, which is how centrally about engagement and how we can increase that across different communities. So again, you know, I don't want to keep going about new Met for London plan, but the race action plan was before the new Met for London plan. But there's definitely mechanisms and push behind how we do that better.
One more? Okay. And to finish off, Councillor Gardner.
The story of my life. I'd like to actually make a comment about the way that the police are dealing with me at the moment. I haven't been caught doing anything, so I'm too sneaky for that. But because of the community work that I do, the police have been really good in terms of their coming out to speak to the women that I deal with me, because the women trust me, and by bringing police officers in with them, they will also. So I'm actually giving you a compliment there, basically. You know, not personal. No, but the point is, it's trying to engage and to increase the trust. There's a lot of people that do not trust the police. Like I said to you before, I think a lot of people come from communities where the police are corrupt, and so they don't trust police. So if you put somebody in there, you know, if you send a policeman directly to some of these groups, they're not going to believe you. But if you need to get somebody to go, and I mean, I'm not bigging myself up. I've got enough work as it is. But I'm grateful for the support that the police are actually giving me in the work that I do, because you know that DV and violence against women and girls is you know, my reason for living, basically. And so anything that the police can do to help me, I will compliment you on. Okay?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think, you know, that reiterates the key, really, of making sure we get the ward officers out on the ground, meeting people that are doing things with the community, because very much those opportunities that we need to link in with, because us generating events doesn't really sort of cut the mustard in terms of dealing with members of the community that won't traditionally go to those sort of things. So, you know, that will be the direction which we'll be monitoring via a performance framework, that we're making sure that our teams are finding out those opportunities and having regular conversations. So, yeah, thank you, Janet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. My thanks to our witnesses this evening and the police. You may leave if you wish to do so. We'll now move on to our next item. Thank you very much. Item 6 is the 2024-25 Budget Planning Report for services within this remit of the committee, pages 31 to 40. Andy and Kerry, thank you very much for your patience. Whenever you're ready, please begin.
Thank you, Chair. This is the first finance appearance at the Select Committee for the new budget cycle, where we'll be updating the committee on the current challenges and the work underway to prepare for the consultation budget to be presented to December Cabinet. We will then come back to this committee in January 24 to discuss the position presented in the consultation budget and to present the specific proposals within the remit of this committee for consideration. The feedback from this committee will then be included in the budget report, which will be presented to February Cabinet, where Cabinet will be asked to approve the budget proposals to full Council. So I won't be running through the whole report this evening, but will provide headlines in terms of the Council's in-year monitoring position and set out the context of the Council's approved budget strategy. For 23-24, the Council are reporting a net underspend of £23,000, with the services within the remit of this committee forecast to overspend by £1,778,000, with this overspend being driven by three key issues. These being the green spaces savings being impacted by external factors such as inflation, community safety and enforcement due to impacts at Heathrow and Brexit-related pressures, and finally income pressures within the planning service. Within these services, there are £12.5 million worth of savings to be delivered in 23-24, with £1,083,000 of this recorded as red. £600,000 of this relates to fees and charges uplifts, predominantly linked to parking. £200,000 linked to better targeting the demand for recycling sacks, £241,000 within green spaces, and £42,000 for street cleansing. The total savings within green spaces of £1.3 million, with just over half of this banked or on track. The HRA is currently forecast to break even. With regards to the MTFS, in February 23, the Council savings requirement to 27-28 was estimated to be £55,414,000, with the single largest factor being driven by exceptional inflation, adding £60 million to the budget gap. Within the remit of this committee, there are no exceptional inflation items, with a total requirement within the remit of this committee accounting for £7.1 million of the £60 million requirement, with the forecast pay award making up £4.7 million of this and the remaining £2.4 million being driven by the inflation requirement on contracted expenditure. Service pressures are forecast to add £23 million, predominantly from the impact of demographic growth within waste services, £2.9 million, and within homelessness a further £2.1 million. The GLL contract of £1.6 million, with this element largely being offset by the new contract included in the saving programme. Finally, corporate items add just under 12 million, with 6.5 of this being driven by the Council's borrowing requirement to fund the capital programme, and 4.1 million from the TfL concessionary fares levy as a result of demand returning to pre-pandemic levels, with this element of the budget gap sitting outside of this committee. Over the next few months, in the build-up to December Cabinet, we will continue to work on assessing the budget gap, with inflation remaining stubbornly high and demand pressures on council services linked to the cost of living crisis. Alongside this, we will also be exploring ways to reduce the council's expenditure by driving efficiency gains whilst protecting frontline services and using the council's transformation process to formulate the budget proposals that will be presented back to this committee in January. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I invite questions from members if there are any. None? Okay. Councillor Farley.
I have to be one, didn't I? Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Page 35, I've got a couple of questions with this. What is special about green spaces that it's isolated for the inflationary pressures out of the rest of resident services? What is it that's particular?
Thank you, Councillor. So I think the issue that's driving that particular service area has been linked to the way the council saving programme has been pulled together. So that was an area where we targeted particular efficiency gains, so that then reduced the funding envelope for that service. So it's not that inflation is particularly impacting on that area, it's just that as that envelope got smaller with inflation running the way it has been, it just means that it's been a larger impact because of the reducing envelope. But the saving programme was targeting efficiencies within green spaces rather than it being cuts, and then when those pressures came through and negotiated contracts, it just meant that that total pressure was more significant on that service area.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. Sticking with that section on page 35, point to A3. So it's talking about the pressures in planning and the expenditure pressures from staffing costs and the use of external consultants. These external consultants, are they supplementing or are they instead of permanent staff effectively?
Thank you, Councillor. So within the planning service, there's always going to be some niche specialist areas where if we brought that in and kept that within the council's in-house service provision, it'd mean that you'd effectively be overfunding the demand. So that's why we would use external consultants from time to time. The impact on fees and charges income in that service area is being driven by economic downturn, where we're seeing construction industry seeing significant inflation pressures, Brexit leading to supply chain issues. So overall, there's just been a slowdown in the construction area, which then has a knock-on impact on the planning income. Thank you.
Any other questions? No? In which case, as members will be aware, this is one of two opportunities for the committee to comment and note. Historically, our main comments came in the January meeting. I believe that'd be the same on this occasion. So for now, if we're happy to note the report and thank the officers for their attendance. Thank you very much. You may leave if you wish to do so. Item 7 is the draft final report, a review of alligating in Hillingdon. I know Councillor Small wanted to say something, but that's fine, okay. Are we happy to note? Just for the record as well, I know Liz has spoke to the witnesses. Would you like to comment on the feedback received?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So I did send out the draft recommendations to the witnesses who had attended throughout the review, and they have given us some positive feedback and said that they are happy with those. So hopefully the committee will be minded to agree those. The report can be go to Cabinet later in the year.
I think they've all said they're happy to note, so that was quicker than I thought it'd be. Okay, item 8 is the forward plan. Thank you. And item 9 is the work programme 73 to 76. Liz, did you wish to comment?
Yes, please, Chairman. I have actually produced, so the Chairman has actually come up with some ideas for the work programme, which was looking slightly light. I've got a number of items here that will be added to the work programme, spread out across the next year. I have actually produced a short list, which I can very quickly circulate to members, just so they can see that. If you just bear with me 1 second, please. So as I say, these ideas have been will be added to the work programme. There are just a few comments that I wanted to make on some of them. So the first one is graffiti removal. I will be arranging a site visit regarding graffiti, so further details to be confirmed on that one, and this will then be added to the work programme. In terms of sheltered housing, just to inform members that there is a report coming to Cabinet in October, which will give an overview of 2 of the borough's sheltered housing schemes. So it would probably be beneficial for the committee to see that report prior to deciding whether or not it's something that we want to add to the work programme. The third one is tree planting. I think this is something that we perhaps need a little bit more information on in terms of what we want to know and what period we're looking at. I was going to propose perhaps we could circulate a map just showing numbers and locations of tree planting, something we could just do outside of the committee meeting if that's the area of interest. And then moving on to food waste, this is to look at the success of the scheme so far, so what the take-up has been and what is being done to maybe improve on that. So this will be an information item. Street champions, not something we hear much about these days. So I think the focus here will be just to find out whether it's still happening, is it being promoted, and again another information item on that one. Animal welfare. This is to look at the council's relationship with third parties, so the licensing aspect mainly, and possibly looking at work with charities and so on. As I believe Richard mentioned earlier, there has been a review going on, an internal review which is now nearing completion or completed. So I think the committee will want to assess what's happened and perhaps scrutinise this to ensure that the changes have been beneficial. So again, an information item on that. And then finally, on sports facilities engagement and inclusivity. This is something that I'll be speaking further to the Chairman about in terms of refining exactly what is the area of specific interest and then adding that to the work programme as well. So there'll be a number of items will be added. When you see your next work programme, there'll be quite a bit more on there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And just to emphasise, those were just merely my suggestions. This is decided by the committee, so if you have any other ideas or there's something on there you don't quite like and would like to see removed, then by all means feel free to contribute now. I could say a little bit about the sports side of it. My thinking was behind, particularly with the World Cup, we've seen a huge increase in the number of women participating in sports. And my sort of concern is that we have a lot of clubs in the borough that are probably more edged towards the male-dominated sport, what it's known to be previously. Are the facilities adequate for females to participate in sport, things like showers and all those sort of things, as well as accessibility for people with disabilities and things like that? A number of sports clubs don't have charity status in the borough. That limits them to the amount of funding that they are eligible to bid for. so they are really limited to council projects such as Chrysalis or ward budgets. And I would like to see what the council perhaps doing to encourage and assist those clubs to have a long-term goal of getting to that status where they can broaden their horizons and expand the amount of funds that are available to them. That was my thinking behind the sports side of it. But again, if you have any other suggestions or comments that you want to make, then now's the time to do it. Councillor Gardner.
Can we somehow include on the sports thing and facilities about women-only swimming sessions, because we're having a lot of problems with people wanting, obviously, to swim with other women, yeah?
That's a good suggestion, Councillor Gardner. Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about next month. Are we getting the locator next month, are we?
I believe there's a presentation on the locators.
I just wanted to understand what exactly we were going to be getting, essentially, with that.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. That I have been in liaison with Mark Billings, who is the, as you know, the head of housing, on that one, to sort of clarify what exactly we will be getting. I think we will be getting an information report about Locata. I did request some kind of live demo, but that has yet to be confirmed, so I'm not entirely sure how that would work. But I know it's something the members expressed an interest in.
Thank you. Yes, and certainly, because I think it's very important as council we've seen the system, because residents speak about it, and it's all sort of in the abstract. We've got no idea really what it looks like or how it works. And I think it's very, very valuable to see it up close, and you know, that helps us in our work as councillors.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. So I will certainly go back to Mark on that and make sure that some kind of live demo. I don't think there's any reason why they couldn't do that. Thank you.
I'll be happy to note. Other than that, thank you very much. That concludes the business for this evening. Thank you very much for your attendance, and a safe journey home, everyone. Good night.